We're going to talk about a story today that, on the surface, is a personal tragedy. But when you look closer, it pulls back the curtain on the deep cracks in a system that's really at its breaking point. It's about immense pressure, the very real human cost of that pressure, and what happens when a vital public service is just stretched way too thin.
I succumb to the pressure. This job is very tough for me. Suicide is the only option. These are the absolutely heartbreaking last words of Harish Singh Mahar, a 43-year-old court clerk. They were found in a note he left behind, and in it he points the finger directly at a professional life that had become completely unbearable.
So here's what happened. On a Friday morning, Harish Mahar went to the court complex where he worked and jumped from one of the buildings. It was a complete shock. And to really understand why this happened, we have to look closer at what he wrote in that final note.
You see, the note Harish left, it's so much more than a farewell. It's really a window into his daily struggle. And it's a direct plea for change.
When you read it, you can see all these layers of his distress. He mentions that he was 60% physically handicapped, and his job was incredibly demanding. He even links the start of his suicidal thoughts directly to when he took on this specific role of an almad. And what's just so powerful, his final request wasn't for himself. It was for others. He asked that in the future, specially abled people be given less strenuous roles, what he called light seats, so no one else would have to suffer the way he did.
So that word he used, almad, that's the key here. That was the source of his pressure. So let's zoom out from his very personal story for a second to understand the professional world that pushed him right to the edge.
So what exactly is an Ahalmed? Well, it's not just any clerk. People describe them as the nerve center of the entire court. They're the ones who manage the literal paper trail of justice. Everything, every file, every record, every schedule, it all flows through them. It's a critical role.
So you hear work pressure, but what does that actually look like? Well, for an Ahalmed, it's an 11-hour marathon, and it's relentless. The day starts at 9 a.m., and you're immediately buried, juggling hundreds of cases, fielding nonstop questions from lawyers, all while preparing these huge reports. And then after 5 p.m., when the court officially closes, your work is just starting, prepping everything for the next day. You're lucky if you get out of there by 8 p.m.
And look, this wasn't just Harish Mahar's experience. It wasn't an isolated thing. This quote from one of his colleagues says it all. The burnout is so widespread. The stress doesn't just end when they walk out of the courthouse. It literally follows them home, into their nightmares. And that's the thing. This kind of intense individual pressure, it's really just a symptom of a much bigger problem happening within Delhi's entire judicial system.
Just take a look at that number for a second. 26,000. That's how many cases are heard every single day by only about 700 judges. The volume is just staggering. And remember, behind every one of those cases is a mountain of paperwork managed by an AHMD.
And here's what happens when you have that kind of daily flood of cases. The backlog, well, it's just exploded. In about 2 decades, it's more than tripled, ballooning from around 500,000 pending cases to 1.6 million. The system is, quite literally, drowning in cases.
So you'd think, okay, the workload is skyrocketing, they must be hiring more people to handle it, right? Nope, not at all. Almost 1 out of every 5 sanctioned jobs for these crucial staff members is just sitting empty. We're talking about over 700 vacancies. The bottom line is simple. Way more work is being handled by fewer and fewer people.
And this is where you really see the disconnect between the official line and what's happening on the ground. On one hand, you have the Delhi High Court saying it's conscious of the problem, that audits are underway. But on the other side, you have the staff out there protesting, saying it as plainly as possible. One person is doing the work of 4. They're demanding justice, not just another audit.
Okay, so here's where the story gets even bigger. Harish Mahar's story of burnout and desperation, it's not just about the courts. It taps right into this huge national conversation that's happening around mental health in India. And that really brings us to the central question, doesn't it? Was this an isolated tragedy, a one-off, or is it a symptom of a much wider crisis? Well, the data pretty clearly suggests it's the latter. If you look at India's National Mental Health Survey, the numbers are just staggering. About 150 million people in the country need some form of mental health care. Let that sink in. That's a massive population of people who are quietly struggling, often completely behind the scenes. And this, for me, is maybe the most critical statistic of all. Of those 150 million people who need help, a massive 80% do not receive any care whatsoever. There's this enormous gap between the need for support and people actually getting it, and it's because of all kinds of things. Stigma, lack of access, you name it.
But it's not all bleak. There has been some really important positive change on a systemic level. The law in India has actually evolved a lot. I mean, it used to be that attempting suicide was a crime. Then, in 2017, a new act came in that recognized it's usually tied to severe stress. And now the new penal code has officially decriminalized it, which is a huge step toward a more compassionate, health-focused approach. So yeah, the problems are huge, both in the court system and across the country. But it's so important to remember that help is out there. There is a path to getting support.
And that's really the balance we need to strike, right? It's absolutely vital to shine a light on these systemic failures, but we can't lose sight of the resources and the messages of hope that can actually empower people to go out and find that help.
And just to give you a couple of real examples, you have organizations like the Sanjeevani Society, which has been offering crisis counseling for decades. And then there's Snehi, which provides free counseling right over the phone. These are real, tangible, accessible options for anyone who's in distress. And look, those are just two examples. Across India, there are countless groups working right on the ground, fighting stigma, offering a listening ear, and slowly but surely trying to close that 80% treatment gap.
So we'll leave you with this question. Harish Mahar's death was a tragedy, but it was a tragedy born from a broken system. And it leaves all of us to wonder, when a system breaks like this, who is responsible for putting the pieces back together? Is it the courts, the government, the community, or is it all of us, to make sure no one else is ever pushed to believe that suicide is their only way out?